I'm Eric Froyen, Associate Professor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Science at Cal Poly Pomona. It's a pleasure to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Christopher Gardner, Professor of Medicine at Stanford University. He is a co-author of the 2019 ADA Consensus Report on Nutrition Therapy for Adults with Diabetes or Prediabetes, and the current chair of the American Heart Association Nutrition Committee. For about 30 years, his research has examined what to eat and what to avoid for optimal health. This includes more than 20 nutrition intervention trials conducted with more than 2,000 participants. The primary study outcomes in these trials are typically cardiometabolic factors. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Christopher Gardner.
Thank you very much. Honor to be here. It was pretty fun to see how silly you all got last night at dinner and what a fun group this is. I was very impressed, including the emotional outbursts that happened. So, looks like you love your program, you love food, so let me talk about food the way that I study it. So, yeah, been doing this for a long time. I'll admit up front that although most of my funding is from the NIH, I've taken some money from Beyond Meat, so maybe I'm an industry shill, so keep that in mind. So I was asked to talk about some of my research as it relates to plant versus animal-based foods. So I'm going to start off with some national guidelines and then cover 4 of our studies and then end up with a scientific statement on popular diets that we recently put out. If you look at national guidelines, it's not like there's one diet for cancer, one for heart disease, and one for diabetes. They're really quite similar. So you're probably not going to be shocked to see that the items you should include are plant-based, and the ones that you should exclude are not just animal-based, but also plant-based added sugar and refined grain, right? So if we're going to refer to plant-based, I much prefer whole food plant-based as a term. There are a lot of foods with added sugar and refined grain out there. Same thing for American Heart. So that was American Cancer I just showed you, but for American Heart, same kind of things to include and avoid. And once again, ultra-processed foods and added sugars. And I think you've had some or gonna talk some more today about ultra-processed foods, and I'm gonna miss that. Sorry, I have to run just a little bit after this talk. And then as was just mentioned, I had the honor of being involved in some diabetes care guidelines that got updated. Isn't this my plate type thing a little interesting, right? There aren't 4 groups, there's only 3. What happened to the dairy in the upper right corner? Oh, it's water. How about that? Oh, how controversial do we want to be here? The fruits are gone. It's just non-starchy vegetables for half of your plate. And the fruits and the potatoes get combined in a kind of smaller, overall, it's pretty much the same kind of pattern here, right? So we have been trying to do that in different ways in what we've been studying, and one of my oldest studies, if you go way back, this was published 20 years ago. Actually, a fun inside story here is that I was a postdoc at the time, and I wrote this grant thinking, okay, I'm going to have to get a real job someday, and they're going to ask me if I ever wrote a grant. And I'm going to write a grant, and it'll never get funded, so I'm just going to write the one I want. I'm going to make one a vegetarian diet and one a non-vegetarian diet. And it got funded, and I got to stay at Stanford. So, go ahead and write a grant just for fun and see if it gets funded. And the general idea here was, and this is the heart of a lot of what I do, food is complicated. And at that time, the general guidelines for a heart-healthy diet was basically low-fat, low cholesterol. How many different ways are there to eat low-fat and low cholesterol? A lot. And so we designed 2 diets that were identical in total fat, cholesterol, saturated fat, met the American Heart Association guidelines, but one was very much convenience food oriented, and one was very much whole food plant-based, which actually meant I had to put cheese in the lentil soup, and I had to put butter on the whole grain bread, and I had to put egg in the spinach salad so I could match the cholesterol and the saturated fat. But one diet had far more fiber, phytonutrients, and things like that. So the idea was that the challenge would be, hey, physicians, I know they don't teach you any nutrition in med school, But don't feel like you can get away with just saying, okay, I'm going to put you on a statin after you've tried a low-fat diet. Go eat a low-fat diet, whatever that is, and then come back and it won't work, and I'll give you a drug. And so we thought, no, what about the fiber and the phytochemicals and everything else? And so this doubling in LDL cholesterol lowering that we reported was, yes, on a low-fat diet, you could lower your LDL cholesterol, but if it was also low-fat, high-fiber, high phytonutrient, you might increase your chances of not going on that drug. This is how complicated food is, right? You can't just come across with a simple message. So we said that emphasis on including a nutrient-dense plant-based food diet would be better than just saying low-fat. So this is the kind of study we love pulling off. It can be complicated. People are worried about how much you're matching, how much you're not matching. I'm going to now tell you a study where we ended up on Netflix, and one of the downsides of Netflix is more people see it, and more people criticize you. And one of the criticisms we got here from Peter Attia, which I don't have any slides for, but I'm just going to riff here and expand on this, dismissed our whole study and said, God, Gardner failed Science 101. Everybody knows that in science you isolate a single variable and you see what happens. Peter, welcome to this century. I'm sorry, a vegan diet is different than an omnivorous diet in more than one thing. Okay, so to get into this study, we were fortunate enough to get it published in JAMA Network Open, and then I have another inside little comment here. These days, one of the things I like in papers is some journals are doing a graphical abstract. And so this is the graphical abstract, which makes it a little easier to understand. But what really annoyed me is they never showed me this before they published it. Wouldn't you think they'd ask me? Hey, it's kind of cool that they don't say, and we expect a graphical abstract. They say, hey, we've read it, and we're going to make one for you. Okay, so just in defense here, you're the only ones who are going to know this, because I don't get to say this that often. You see in the middle there how the vegans have a carrot, and the honors have meat and a carrot. Couldn't they have just added another carrot? It looks like we starved them. Like we took something away and we didn't add anything back. All they had to do was ask me, and I would have said, no, it was unapologetically delicious, and we added some back and replaced it. Okay, I'm not mad about that at all, you can tell, but thank you for letting me vent. Okay, so this particular hypothesis was that if you took identical twins, which I thought, wow, what a cool idea. To be honest, it wasn't my idea. The producer of the Netflix came to me and said, I think you should use identical twins. And I thought, that's insane. That will take way too long. And he said, no, I'm going to help you do this. And I thought, well, it's actually kind of cool scientifically. That will just notch us up one level because we're sort of controlling for genetics. Wow. Okay, well, I thought it would be really hard, but if you're going to help me, we will do identical twins. And we will randomly assign one twin to vegan, one to omnivore. We'll deliver foods to them for 4 weeks, so they sort of instantly are on track here. And then for 4 weeks, they have to eat on their own. And we'll suck lots of blood and get lots of icky poop from them. And we'll look at lots of stuff. So there's the design of our study. It was 22 pairs, 44 altogether. If any of you saw it, I have a disclaimer here. They featured 4 twins, a pair of black women, black men, Asian women, and 1 pair of white guys, and a bunch of people said, what an amazing job of getting a very ethnically diverse study group. So let me just tell you that the ones who weren't featured were all white women, okay? So here's the real distribution. It's almost all women, almost all well-educated, and they featured a very diverse group. Oh, my time is up. Thank you very much. I have to get it. No? Okay, I'll keep going. Anyway, we're super happy that actually only one person quit, But because they were matched to their twin, we had to drop their twin. So we had 21 out of 21 pairs quit. We went with a company called Trifecta that made the meals for us for the first 4 weeks. All of them got meals for 4 weeks. And here's another important point to me. One of my favorite new words is equipoise. And for me, the term equipoise comes up when you're doing a nutrition study and you're comparing one diet versus another, and you kind of have a slant one way, and you make a really butt-kicking great diet A, and you have crappy diet B, and say, oh, how about that? A1. And then the poor public, because the next week somebody who really loves diet B makes a kick-butt diet B and a crappy diet A, and headlines say, oh, never mind, it went the other way. So one of the things that we focused on here was they all joined as omnivores, and we took the healthy eating index, checking out what they were eating along the way. And for those of you who are or are not familiar with the healthy eating index, America does not do very well. 100 is the top score. For as long as we've been collecting data, the score's been like 55 to 60, which means there's lots of room for improvement. And I'm only bringing that up to show you that at baseline, all of our twins were right about at that American number of 55 to 60. And on the diet, the omnivores got a better diet from us than they were eating normally. So it's not just that we made a great vegan diet. We didn't. Well, we did. We made a pretty good vegan diet, but we also made a good omnivorous diet. So this graph is just trying to show you that the omnivores also ate better. And really what was happening roughly was about 30% of their calories are coming from animal-based foods. And for the vegans, they were eating, the two groups were sort of eating 70% the same, and then 30% calories from animal-based foods, and the vegans were eating 30% more of the things they were already being given. Does that make sense? So that's the main difference. And Peter Attia, that was not one thing, that was a lot of things. That was fiber and beans and on and on and on. Okay, what happened? The LDL cholesterol went down more in the vegans. This is not rocket science. This is almost stupid. They had less saturated fat and they had more fiber. It totally should have happened. But we really looked at a lot of other things along the way. So that was statistically significant, as was a drop in fasting insulin. They lost a little more weight. I don't have the slides prepared here, but we have some really cool microbiome study results coming out soon that are being released. And I forgot to add that after this paper came out, we also looked at epigenetic biological clocks and telomere caps, and the vegans in 8 weeks got younger than the omnivores. There's a whole separate paper on that one. We did some diet adherence to show how well they were adhering. And so here is cholesterol. As you might imagine, once you go vegan, your cholesterol drops to nothing, right? That makes sense. And the omnivores' cholesterol was fairly similar. Once you go vegan, your B12 goes to almost nothing. That makes sense. All you got to do is take a supplement or get some fortified soy milk, not too tough. This one's really interesting if anybody ever wants to follow up on this in their studies. We found this multiple times. The vegan iron was higher than the omnivore. Aren't we always assuming that iron comes from food that had blood in it, animal meat, things like that? We actually found this in several studies as we wrote this up. So I'm not going to belabor it, but it's pretty interesting to me that on the vegan diet, the iron was up, not down. Okay, pretty crazy, but pretty happy that we got some good adherence data here. Okay, so we concluded that the healthy vegan diet improved several cardiometabolic outcomes in this cool study. And part of this was about doing a research study and getting it published, but for me, this is really a brand new experience in trying to communicate health science to the general public. And so, unbelievable that we had these fabulous microbiologists help us. The Sonnenbergs are leaders in their field. It's a real pleasure to work with them. But the other thing that was really brand new to me was sort of the engaging and entertaining part of this. I don't know if you think this is a good thing or a bad thing, but they were adorable. They were really cute, identical twins, and they were a blast to work with. Oh my God, they finished each other's sentences, and they were just goofy and fun. And when you get a whole bunch of identical twins together, they are a riot. They're like, many of them had never been in a room with that many other identical twins at the same time. But what was also really impressive about Luis Cejoyos, who was the producer of this, was that he brought in a Michelin star chef and wove this into the study, as well as a senator, a mayor, can't mention his name anymore, but a chicken rancher who turned into a mushroom rancher, brought up all kinds of facts and figures from concentrated animal feeding operations, had a regenerative cattle rancher, more data, brought in a heart-wrenching story of a family that lived next to a concentrated animal feeding operation, and this woman's whole family was disrupted by the stench and the wind blowing the lagoons of manure over to her house. They had advocates, lawyers, health professionals. Ooh, food safety right here. So I forgot you were going to be here today. Had a whole section on food safety, and Marion Nessel and the NRDC. And they're just adorable. And so part of this was really interesting to me just in terms of communicating science. So I really think we did an excellent, rigorous study. We did not focus on a single variable, Peter Attia, but we did do diet assessment and applied all our skills, equipoise, great lab techniques, et cetera, statistical analyses. And it was fun to communicate. So this is sort of a whole new area for me to think about, is trying to get people to see and understand science in a better way. So that was fun, looking at plant-based diets. That was one way we did it. Another thing that drives me nuts is the keto diet, especially because most people do it wrong. Most people think it's all meat. It's not. It's all fat. We don't have any place to store extra protein in our bodies. So as soon as we've met our needs, we turn it into carbs and throw yourself out of ketosis. A ketogenic diet is all fat. And here's one of the things that we all have to work on, because it's pretty clear. Of all the calories that we get in the US, we get about 10% of our calories from high-quality carbs, from animal and plant protein, from mono, poly, and unsaturated fat. I'm kind of doing a little rounding here. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. That's 60%. 40% of our calories is from added sugar and refined sugar. So added refined carbs. So we designed this study that matched some things and unmatched other things. So the keto diet does promote non-starchy vegetables. So does the Mediterranean diet. A ketogenic diet says no added sugar and refined grain. And technically, a Mediterranean diet doesn't usually have that in the score, but totally consistent with what a good Mediterranean diet would be. The real difference is keto is no beans, no fruits, and no grains. And a Mediterranean diet embraces all of those. So, given that I feel like all the health professionals are on board for no added sugar or less added sugar and less refined grain, but most of us embrace fruits and beans and whole grains. Our study question was, if you did get rid of the added sugar and refined grain and you celebrated non-starchy vegetables, would there really be an added benefit to getting rid of the beans and the fruits and the whole grains on top of that? So this was a crossover study done with 40 individuals, half of whom had type 2 diabetes and half of whom were pre-diabetic. We delivered food again for the first 4 weeks. Then for 8 weeks, they had to make food on their own. For me, this brings up the terms efficacy and effectiveness, or rigor and generalizability. So when we're feeding them, it's being efficacious and rigorous, but not so generalizable. So when they're on their own, it's effectiveness, and we're getting more generalizability. We even had some data 12 weeks after this study. I won't have time to show those today. Although many of you met Matt Landry recently. I heard his name a couple times since I've been here. He did an amazing paper on the adherence to this diet study where he addressed the 12 weeks afterward. It's a beautiful paper. The main outcome of this study was glycosylated hemoglobin, and it went down in both groups and was not statistically different. We looked at a lot of cardiometabolic outcomes, and of them, only 2 things ended up being statistically different. One was LDL cholesterol was higher in the keto diet. No surprise, it's higher in saturated fat. And triglycerides dropped in both groups, but it dropped more in the keto diet. Not a surprise, if you get rid of all the added sugar and refined grain in your diet, you probably do even better at dropping triglyceride. But overall, we found the glycosylated hemoglobins were not different. And even though the well-formulated ketogenic diet, sorry, there's an equipoise term in there. We didn't just give them keto, we gave them well-formulated ketogenic diet, according to Steve Finney and Jeff Olick. Greater decrease in triglycerides, but also a rise in LDL cholesterol. Don't have time to show you, but multiple lower nutrient intakes on keto because it was such a restrictive diet, and also less adherence. Very poor long-term adherence to keto because it's so restrictive. So that was our take there. Let me see, do I have a clock up here? I don't think I have a clock. Okay, good, because I want to have time for questions too. Good, so if I have 15 more, I won't talk for any more than 10. This is one of our most fun studies, but absolutely our best acronym ever that we've ever come up with. So think about that for just a minute. Study with appetizing plant food, a meat-eating alternative trial. Thank you very much. Okay. In this particular one, it was 2 servings a day of red meat or Beyond Meat. And then think about this for a minute. Like, how do you pick the dose and the duration? And sometimes I give a whole talk on this. So pause just a minute for the dose. What do you think would have done it? Would once a day have been enough? Once a week? How about only red meat and only Beyond Meat for 8 weeks? That's all you eat. That would never fly, right? So it has to be somewhere in the middle there. So 2 servings a day is about 25% of your calories. It means 75% remains the same. Probably a little, people weren't all that excited about eating meat twice a day, every day, for all this time. But it was enough for a perturbation to get some movement in clinical markers if you could only do it for 8 weeks. And you know, when you sign people up, lots of people when I finish say, cool, how come you didn't do it for 5 years? I said, well, no one would sign up to do that. And so how about 1 year? How about 6 months? How about, you know, a lot of these decisions are quite arbitrary and a lot of them are quite practical. Okay, I'm trying to get some cardiometabolic risk factors to move. Can they move in 8 weeks? Yep. Can they move in 4 weeks? Yep. Many of them can move in 2 weeks, right? Will they stay after 8 weeks? Yeah, but then you could just keep extending it. How about 4 months? How about 6 months? How about a year? At some point, you got to stop and say, okay, I moved it. We moved this risk factor. And other kinds of studies need to be done to follow up longer term, or with other doses, or with other products. So at the end of the day, I want to point out this is just one study. It doesn't answer all the questions. But there really wasn't anything out there at that time, and there were a couple New York Times full-page ads, if you remember these, saying, here's dog food, and here's plant-based meat. Look, it's the identical ingredients. Basically, plant-based meats are dog food. Like, who wrote this? Oh, the Consumers for Free Choice. Who's that? Well, it was kind of the Cattlemen's Association, and so they're a little worried here. So at least we got one study out there. There's been another since then, but there's not a lot of literature, not a lot of studies on this. So these were generally healthy adults in a crossover trial with 8 weeks on each arm, 2 servings per day. Our main outcome in this study was trimethylamine oxide. Part of the community likes this risk factor and part of them does not. This is an emerging heart disease risk factor. Your clinician probably won't ask this as part of standard clinical practice, but part of getting grants funded and getting papers published is doing something novel. So it's a little bit novel. It's related to inflammation and blood clotting, and Stan Hazen from the Cleveland Clinic is a huge fan of this, and right after this, I'm leaving for Chicago for the American Heart Association, and I'm sure there's going to be a TMAO session. There's always a TMAO session at American Heart. Here's a quick flow chart of who was in our study, and this is pretty typical. Almost 300 people said they might be interested until we told them what was going on, and then really only 40 were eligible and wanted to do it, but pretty proud of our retention. 38 joined and 36 finished. Once again, it's more white educated women than anything else, so not entirely generalizable, but 31% non-Caucasian. And this part was fun too. So these are the nutrient profiles of the different things that we were feeding them. So it wasn't just burgers. So Beyond Meat in particular makes burgers, crumbles, sausage, chicken type strips. And if you looked, they were pretty well matched on calories, the two products. Obviously the plant products had more carbs because the meat products had none. They were totally matched on protein. The plant products had less saturated fat, and since we did this study, they actually got rid of the coconut fat and they've switched for avocado fat. So they've actually reformulated, which is really important in this field. Even after this study worked, which you'll see it did, they didn't just rest on their laurels, they reformulated more and lowered their saturated fat more. I think that's a really great message for working with the food industry right now, is can you continue to reformulate? The plant products had more fiber, the animal obviously had none. Just a quick point, this is interesting. They've been slammed for having high sodium, and they should be because sodium is a risk factor, and that's a problem. It was mostly in the burgers compared to the ground meat and the beef patties that had almost no sodium. But guess what happened to the participants who got plain ground meat and plain patties? They salted them. The overall sodium content in the two diets was identical because they salted their meat. So the patties were pre-salted. Anyway, they were supposed to get at least 2 servings a day, and they did. Another drum roll, please. The trimethylamine oxide went down, which it should have. Again, it's not really rocket science. The precursors for this risk factor are choline and what am I blocking? Phosphatidylcholine. Okay, and that's in meat. It's not in plants. Their weight went down significantly. This is a little bizarre. They were eating the same number of calories. It's not a clinically relevant amount. It was less than 1 kilo, but it was pretty funny. After 8 weeks, everybody was 1 or 2 pounds lighter, 1 or 2. So it actually means it's the most statistically significant finding, but it's not clinically significant. It was just very consistent. And their LDL dropped. It was lower in saturated fat and higher in fiber. This, I think, is really fascinating. The blood pressure did not change. It was not different between them. And I think that's important because they've been getting slammed for the high sodium. So I'm getting close to time here, so I'll just say great adherence, good retention. It's only one brand of product. Let's not get into that there was no washout period, but if anybody wants to get me on the side, we just had them go from straight one to the other. And these are self-selected participants. Anyway, the plant products improved several cardiovascular outcomes. And I know the last presentation of the day is going to be on plant-based meats, so maybe you'll build on that right there. Let me finish with this scientific statement that we just put out from the American Heart Association. In 2021, Alice Lichtenstein and a group of others updated the 2006 guidelines. It's usually not as much time, but 15 years later they updated them. And you would be shocked, the new guidelines say eat a lot of veggies and fruits, a lot of whole grains, and get most of your protein from legumes and nuts. And we were asked to say, okay, now that we've got these updated guidelines, could you write a paper across all these different popular diets that are out there to show how well they are aligned? This is an interesting assignment because we didn't actually have to prove if any of these diets worked or not. The point was, are the popular diets aligned with the guidelines that we have? So let me tell you what a fun exercise this was, because we had said, how many patterns are there? I actually been working for the US News and World Report for the last 5 years, and I don't know if you see this every year. They say, here's the top diets. And we look at 40 of them, and it's super annoying because quite a few of them, they're actually the same. And so for this exercise, I got to say, okay, there's really only 10 buckets. There's like 10 buckets of diet patterns that come with a bunch of different names, but I really think there's only 10 buckets of names. And what I hear a lot is, oh, the Mediterranean diet, that's olive oil. I'm on it. I had an Egg McMuffin for breakfast, a Big Whopper for lunch, a Big Mac for dinner, but I have a jigger of olive oil in my nightstand, and before I go to bed, I chug that sucker. I am Mediterranean. It's not true. So if you look at these patterns, it's a mixture of what to emphasize, what's allowed to be included, what you should try to limit, and what you should avoid. And this is a really fun exercise, sort of defining them. And the way we did it is we made paid a whole thing of supplements showing we got a whole bunch of research papers, and here's what people say they're doing when they do those patterns. And it's pretty funny because they didn't all agree. Even 2 diets doing the Mediterranean didn't necessarily agree. But in the end, that's how we approached it, and we came up with a heat map. And I'm getting out of time, I got my warning, so I'll just tell you that the heat map suggested that there's multiple ways to eat well, and the dietary approach to stop hypertension is one, Mediterranean, pescatarian, ovo-lacto-vegetarian, even a higher fat vegan but not a lower fat vegan, and a low-fat diet. They're all pretty good. I'm going to skip the rest. So at the end of the day, we've done a bunch of studies showing that a plant-based diet has advantage over animal-based if it's a whole food plant-based diet. And if you do these studies with equipoise in mind and you're trying to give the other diet a fair shake, yes, B12, calcium, zinc, and iron can be issues, and without belaboring that, there's strategies for all of those. But really, the potential benefits and risks are right here. So many things that plant-based diets are high in, many things they're low in, are related to metabolic benefits and health outcome benefits. And that's why overall, we have found there are more benefits to a plant-based than an animal-based diet. And I have so many people to thank. Okay, I will stop. And I have still 5 minutes for questions? Or is that with the end? And I still have 5 minutes for questions. Thank you very much.
Questions, folks?
Bonnie.
Thank you for this. It was really interesting. I do some similar research to what you do, but I wanted to ask you, have you considered body composition measurements also in some of your studies?
Yes, absolutely. So we do DEXA sometimes. Sometimes it's too short a period to look at. In fact, we just got in. No, never mind. I don't want to use my time for this. I got in trouble for Netflix for something that I don't want to defend. Sure. In fact, one of our older studies, all we really had was lean and fat. And this is an older model of DEXA. And there's now an algorithm that you can use to get visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. Yeah, so all of those are great outcomes. And we have we have a new paper coming out on a weight loss study we did years ago where we now looked at the visceral and saturated and found a slightly different finding than our main finding from our Diet Fits weight loss study. And the low carb had a little benefit for the visceral fat. Way in the back, I see at least one. It's kind of a jog. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. I believe that the Netflix collaboration is critical to spreading information and so forth. Has Netflix approached you to do a part 2 or some other type of identical twin study? Because it's really key, I feel, to get more into the popular lexicon.
So I'm being asked now to do a lot of health science communication talks. And it's not just the benefits, there's some cons. There's some social media issues. It can be really draining to get slammed on social media by influencers who don't do science, but I'm up for it. I'm up for the game. And then the next thing that's happening is some donors came along because they saw Netflix, and we now are doing 120 firefighters. 60 will go plant-based, and 60 will stay omnivores. And a documentary crew just picked the 8 featured firefighters. And I don't know when the calendar's coming out, but I'm sure we'll have a nutrition study firefighter calendar, and $12.99, I'm sure. Somebody with a microphone, probably. Thanks for asking.
Dr. Gardner, excellent presentation. So in a recent interview with the Food Technology magazine, the director of NIH's Nutrition Division, Dr. Andrew Brummer, he mentioned that we need to stop focusing on nutrients, rather the focus should be on the dietary patterns. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, old school is isolating a single nutrient. And then we realized consumers don't buy nutrients, they buy food. So we've looked at soy. I've done a soy study and a garlic study. And the next step beyond that is patterns. Now, you really think for communicating to the public, the pattern is the better idea. Again, I made fun of the person who drinks a shot of olive oil every night because they thought, oh, olive oil is a food, so now I'm Mediterranean. But it's also more vague. So as you try to promote a pattern, a slide that I often use is a plate of steamed broccoli or sauteed broccoli with almonds and olive oil drizzled all over it, which is Mediterranean and keto and vegan. And actually that one plate is almost every one of those patterns that I showed in our paper. So that if you were fighting over things, my diet pattern is right, mine is wrong, I would love those people to sit down over the same meal and recognize that a high quality keto and vegan and whatever diet might actually be the same plate of food sometimes. So if we could have a kumbaya moment and say there's more agreement than controversy out there, and that's a message that I hope we can share with others. And when you get into patterns, that helps a little bit, but again, it's more vague, and so people can stray. Yeah, Rocky?
Yes, thank you very much for yet again another lively and informative presentation. Wonderful. So I wonder how many of those twins, identical twins, after the study stayed on their diet? And were they actually a crossing from the omnivores to plant-based or vice versa?
Yeah. It's an excellent question. We never get the money to follow up, but some of them have been following up on their own. We actually interviewed a pair for something else, and the two of them abandoned everything. They went completely back to their other diet. Of the two tall white guys who got featured in the film, they're both vegetarian right now, and usually vegan, and trying to be even more hardcore, and asked us to develop more resources to help them and others go that same direction. And we had another one that stayed vegan for a while, ended up being vegetarian, and her sister joined her. So we don't track that. The key is here, we don't really expect one thing like this to change everybody, but it's an added set of exposures. And then at some point, something happened. Your uncle dies, or you visit a concentrated animal feeding operation, or you marry somebody new. I mean, I'm vegetarian because my girlfriend dumped me in '83. That was the key thing. So, not proud, but that's why I changed my diet. I got dumped in '83. Worked out pretty well in the long run. So it's all those sort of multiple exposures. So it'd be interesting to track people over a long period of time to see what that last straw was that led to the change. I probably used a...
One, and then two, and then three.
Okay. And then
Thank you for the great talk. I think, as you pointed out, a lot of the health benefits, when you review the results, is kind of makes sense. Everyone knows, But it really shake me is the iron, because I have been working on iron fortification for over 25 years to help. Especially, we have a double fortified salt in India, and we fortify iron in salt, and to spread it out with over 100 million population to address the iron deficiency anemia. So that really shake my, our foundation knowledge. My question actually is probably not to go back to iron, but rather, so when you do all this variety of diets, how do we help address the low-income population? They don't have that variety of the choice. What do they do? To me, it's like as a food scientist or engineer, should we still continue with the food fortification? Because that's a very efficient strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, although to me it's always struck me that we've fortified salt, right, with iodine, and we've fortified refined grain with folic acid. And I know there's some places where they fortify sugar with iron. Guatemala, I think, is an example. For staples, why are we picking the things that we're asking people to eat less of? But to get the population to get it, you have to have something that everyone's eating. So to me, that's a huge challenge, is finding that thing, and I wish it were beans and whole grains, because really globally, those are the least expensive, most nutritious sources of food that are culturally accepted around the globe. But if it's a whole grain, can you fortify whole grains? I assume you can fortify whole grains. Let me take another one because I'm sure I'm out of time, but bless you for working on all those.
Good morning. Thanks so much for this great talk. Incredible information. It's really valuable. My perspective on all this is that it's in the context of behavior modification. That's really what we're going for at the end of the day, is trying to get people to change the way that they eat, what they eat.
Yes.
And it's a bigger puzzle than just the information. You obviously need that information, but then it needs to be translated into that behavior modification. I'm wondering if you have any ideas, or I just want to kind of share that idea with the group, that we need to take this incredible information, hard-earned information, right, and then translate it into a form that will actually impact people's lives on like a really broad scale and make it easy for people to make good choices and do the right thing with their health.
Absolutely. I've been teaching a class for 15 years where we never talk about health. We only talk about climate change, human abuses in the labor force for the food workforce, and animal rights and welfare. Almost every kid in class changes their diet, and we never talk about health, and they change them in good ways. Rafi's going to give a great talk later, and I know taste is the key. The very foundation of this has to be taste. So I now put health in one back pocket and the environment in the other back pocket and say, unapologetically delicious. Oh yeah, it's healthy. Oh yeah, it's good for the environment. But aren't you interested in the unapologetically delicious taste? So many strategies, many different disciplines to bring to bear here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's questions, and I know we could ask Dr. Gardner questions all day. Thank you again for presenting your research.
Thanks for having a great conference.
All right.